Welcome to the CNBC-TV18 special. I'm Shereen Bhan, and on the GST Sentimeter, joining me now is the IT Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Thiaga Rajan. He promised me about a couple of days ago that we would sit down and have a conversation about the controversy around the GST at 28% on online gaming. Remember, the matter has now reached the Prime Minister's office, with venture capitalists, online gaming companies writing to the government and telling the GST Council to review that decision. Mr. Thiaga Rajan, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. It is good to have you here, and thank you very much for sticking with your commitment. So let me start by asking you, did you anticipate this backlash as far as this 28% GST is concerned on full value? Because the rate in itself was never in doubt. Even through the deliberations of the two GOMs, 28% was expected to be finalized as the rate, and industry had come to accept that. But it is 28% on what which is causing the consternation?
Yeah, well, first let me thank you for the opportunity and for giving me this platform to give a bit of explanation. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't comment about this because I'm no longer on the GST Council. But when the reports were submitted, both the reports of the GOM, I was a member of the GOM in both instances, so therefore I feel like it's worth having this clarification. So 28% was never the question, right? The question basically revolved around 4 or 5 things. One, what is the law? The constitutional amendment for GST says that betting and gambling will come under GST. Then the question is, what is betting and gambling, or is there a distinction between games of skill versus games of chance? That's the second issue. Third issue, when things like lottery tickets are already being taxed at 28% on the face value, will it be a contradiction that some games of chance, assuming that we agree that some of these things are games of chance? For example, there are Supreme Court judgments calling horse racing a game of skill and not of chance, or rummy a game of skill. So it's just like contradictory judgments all over the place. So if you open up this can of worms that you'll now do anything less than the face value, some people were concerned with that now put the lottery tickets back on the table. And last of all is, how do you know what is the gross gaming revenue or what is the actual platform fee or access fee? Is it self-reported? Can it be done by accounting? Can it be done by having separate accounts, like an escrow account for betting and a separate account for own, or the fee component? So this was the complexity of it. And of course, in places like casinos, where people don't just play one game, they play multiple games. Unless you do an entry-exit kind of check, you really can't tell what has happened. In fact, the industry likes to bundle things in such a way that you cannot quite tell what are the odds of winning or losing compared to the platform fee. So this was the complexity always. I don't think anybody had a problem with the notion that the highest rate of GST should be applied to gambling. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right?
Absolutely.
We apply high rates to alcohol, we apply high rates to petroleum. It makes no contradiction that we should apply high rates to gambling. Question is on what, and how do we stay on the one hand within the amendment of GST, on the other hand with legal precedent, and also not upset the revenue streams that some states are already making from lotteries.
Right. Now, as far as the 28% is concerned, as you pointed out, there was no discussion or even debate on whether it should be 28%. The decision was that it should be 28%. The question was, what should the 28% levy be? On the other issue, whether something should be taxed as a game of skill or a game of chance, again, the Council was of the clear opinion, and that is the decision that's been taken forward, that that distinction will not be made between game of skill and game of chance. Now, industry's point of view, and this is the online gaming industry's point of view, and even within the online gaming industry's point of view, it's the real money games that are impacted by this decision. They're saying we'll be out of business if it were to be 28% on full value or face value. Now, what do you make of that claim?
Well, I think we need to dig a little deeper into this, right? I mean, first of all, this question of game of skill or game of chance is not a trivial question, because the GST amendment says that betting and gambling shall come under GST. It doesn't say, if it's a question of skill, it's not clear what it comes under. Either the constitutional amendment was not written in congruence with the Supreme Court judgments, or the judgments are not in congruence, vice versa.
So which is why now the amendment will be moved to bring online gaming under it.
So therefore, all these precedents of the, and in a normal country, you would see that the court judgments follow precedent, right? Either one precedent holds and everybody sticks to it, or they write a new precedent and it breaks all the other judgments. But in this GoM, that was not the case. Every week we were getting some new information about some other judgment, some going back to the 70s, some as recently as 2015, saying, and some of them were crucial to the case, meaning the case was, is it a game of skill or chance? Some were oberdicta in the judgment on some other matter that was being adjudicated, and in the process, the Supreme Court said something.
So the GoM wasn't dragging its feet. You're saying that this was just a very complex issue.
Yeah, well, if I'm very honest...
With vested interests involved?
Yeah.
Because there are states that are dependent significantly on the revenue that comes in from this.
Let's be really honest. I think, could it have been done faster? Yes. But with all other things in GST, that's true, right? The personnel, sometimes when people change in the roles or governments change, the reconstitution of the GOMs doesn't happen that quickly. The renomination of the chairperson don't happen quickly. For example, when this GOM was first set, it was not Conrad Sangma who was either a member or the convener. And then, the Gujarat Chief Minister changed, and then, we had some changes and all. So, could the GST and GoM function much more efficiently and kind of on a time-bound scale? Absolutely. On the other hand, was there great complexity here? Absolutely. Of course, there were, I'm not even sure I would call them vested interests. It's a natural interest of, let's say, the Minister of Goa that he wants to protect his industry. It's a natural interest of the Minister of West Bengal that she does not want the notion of 28% on face value to be disrupted because the state of West Bengal makes thousands of crores of revenue out of the sale of lottery tickets. In fact, I'll go one step more profound than that. At some level, I suggested, nobody was a taker, that really horse racing, online gambling and casino should be separated into three different discussions. I'll tell you why. Horse racing is a sport where there is a clear tote and you can see what is coming in and going out and everything is published and taken out and there's no question of bundling. I mean, there are some multi-level bets like the trifecta and all that, but it's very clear what ticket you bought and what you took out. Casinos are not that clear. But then both horse racing and casinos have one thing in common. There is a locus. You cannot run horse racing without a physical location. So it is located in one state and in fact it's regulated by states. So one of the radical suggestions I had, why should horse racing and casinos be under GST at all? Make them like alcohol or petroleum or other things that are only at a state level, because the legislation is state legislation. It's not union government legislation. Online gaming is a different thing because it can be done anywhere, anytime across the country and there's no distinction of state borders. There's no locus.
Or even country borders.
Exactly. But horse racing and casinos, much simpler solution is to say you regulate it as a state, just like lottery is regulated as a state. You tax it as a state and get on with it, and then we'll have some.
But there were no takers.
Nobody was that radical, right? Shall we say? So now we're left with this question of if you're going to take it at 28%, what should you take it on? And I would say everybody spoke their state's revenue and interest. And the real question here is not that the industry will die. The real question is, will it move into the nether world? Will it move underground? So do you want it
Which is also part of the concern and claim that industry has put forward, including to the Prime Minister's office.
That was always the case. Always the question was, how do you incentivize people to stay in the sunlight as opposed to go to the underground market where you can't track what's happening? And in that sense, as I said earlier to you privately, this notion that came up in Chandigarh that we will levy 28% on online gaming and horse racing and only relocate it for casinos was an absurd notion, because the least substitutable, the least secretly actable sport is a casino, right? The whole point of big lights.
Because you're walking here, exactly.
You want the music, you want the flash, you want the food, you want the entertainment. So that is the least risk of being substituted. The question is, will people pay 28% to go to a casino? In my view, probably. I don't think it's the... All of this, I'm not sure is the death of any industry, right? I think it's the difference between, it's like the Laffer curve, right? You make the system reasonable and a lot of people operate on the system and you get lots of revenue. You make the system unreasonable and much of it goes into the untraceable market.
So do you think what is being proposed now is unreasonable?
I have proposed multiple solutions. I think I've talked to you before. So when the most radical solution of leave this to the states except online gaming was found no takers, I suggested two other ways. I said, nobody goes to bet expecting to lose, right? I mean, it's human nature. I'm going to bet expecting to win.
Right.
The real question is, if I'm going to pay 128 instead of 1, and win 2 rupees, then it's a completely different bet than if I pay 1 and win 2 rupees. Right? That's the whole point of whether you tax it 28. And let's say you're able to say that 20% is the platform fee, and you only pay 28% GST on 20% of the total. Then you're placing a 1 rupee 5.6 paise bet on a 2 rupee bet. There's a profoundly different odds in the minds of the punter, the bettor. So all I said was, for things like lottery, there's no question of whether GST changes behavior or not, because they're not expecting to win 10:1. They're not expecting to win 100:1. They're expecting to buy a 1 rupee ticket and win 1 lakh. He doesn't care whether he paid 1 rupee or 1 rupee 28 paise to win 1 lakh. But if you go to games of, odds of 1:3, 2:5, those kinds of odds, it makes a big difference, because 28% skews the odds. So there are multiple ways to deal with that. And one of them I said was to basically say that if your winnings are less than X ratio, you will get the refund of the GST, right? As long as you keep proper track. You'll have to keep electronic track. And if it's more than 10X, let's say, you don't get the rebate. That would actually maximize revenues, incentivize bettors, and not really be a drain of any real loss on GST, because you're only giving him back GST on 1 rupee, right? And you can direct tax, you can income tax the 5 rupee or 10 rupee gain, because it's all computerized now, and those should be taxed as winnings in income. If you can't do that, and that was considered too complicated, we don't want to get into that, then with the help of the committee that we had set up in Tamil Nadu, I had requested Arvind Datta, the senior Supreme Court lawyer, and he heads a committee for us when I was finance minister called Committee on Federal Fiscal Relations, and they are specialists. So they suggested something which I also proposed. They said, at the point of revenue booking, book the revenue into 2 different streams. One stream is whatever you consider to be your gross gaming revenue, your platform fee, your access fee, whatever you want to call it. Only that will be subject to GST. The rest you put in an escrow account for only winnings. And that money will be only subject to TDS and reporting for taxation. Right? This way you keep clean accounts. And now you're no longer applying 28% on the full value. You're applying 28% on whatever the system says is the platform fee, the access fee, the gross gaming revenue. But what that requires is for the industry to agree that they will run separate accounts. Right? And therefore they cannot do this bundling and mixing of the odds. They'll have to reveal truly, if you pay 100, how much of it is going into the access fee and how much of it is really bet money. Right?
Well, these were the proposals that you had actually sent to the GoM. And of course, now we know that the decision of the GST Council, which according to the Revenue Secretary is not a decision at all, it's a reiteration of what in his words, what the law is. The Revenue Secretary in his conversation with me says that there is no question of retrospectivity, because this 28% on full value is the situation as of today. And in fact, they believe that the High Court judgment of the Karnataka High Court will be challenged now by the Revenue Department to say this is established law and this is the rate on full value. So given that, what do you expect this meeting of the GST Council on the 2nd of August to arrive at? And this is also unusual because it's a meeting of the GST Council after a decision has ostensibly been taken to operationalize a decision which hasn't happened previously.
Look, it's no secret that I've been less than a great fan of the way the GST Council operates. Right? I have a lot of profound issues. As you may know, in the first meeting I attended, I listed them because that was the first time a DMK minister had been a member. It was like 3 years into the life of the council. But in practice, these are the nuances that really bother me. Right? Like once a decision, so this, if it is reiteration of the law, why did we need the GoM? If the first GoM report was acceptable, why was it sent back? Now the second GoM report has arrived at the same conclusion that according to the government is the law. Right? Now they have one more meeting just for the sake of implementation. Right? I mean, at some level I'm okay that the GST Council meets, but at some other level, what is the basis for the meeting, how the agenda gets set? For example, in 2022 we had an emergency meeting, or 2021 December. We had an emergency meeting on December 31st with like 24 or 48 hours notice, again unprecedented, for a single point issue of deciding to put on hold the GST Council's decision to raise the rate on some kinds of textiles. Right? I mean, then what's the point of having the council? What's the point of making the decision So a lot of these things are very haphazard. They're not run, with enough, in my mind, with enough foreplanning and thought. And then you end up with kind of, political pressure comes one way, you do something, it comes another way, you do another thing. And I realize it's in its infancy, right? It's a 75-year-old country. Council's been around for 5 years, now 6 years. It's not like it's got a long track record. There'll be teething trouble. But there are some profound issues that need to be addressed, in my opinion, about how the agenda gets set, how the topics are decided, how the decisions are kind of ratified without having to look back, right? For example, compensation. Everybody asked for compensation. And there was kind of discussion about it. There was no decision. Now the question is, who should decide whether compensation should continue or not? If it's the council, it should have been brought to the council as an agenda item and put to vote. If it's not the council, how is it federalism and how is this the prime kind of platform of union-state relations if the compensation issue was not decided by the council but de facto decided by somebody else? Going back to the same terminology, the constitutional amendment called for 5 years. 5 years are up. Discussion closed, right? That's it. There was no actual process further. So these are the, I think, issues that over time will have to be worked out for the council to be really an effective kind of body, right?
So, to end, because, we will have to see what happens on the 2nd, but you do believe that claims of the industry's demise are somewhat exaggerated. You believe what we could possibly see happening is, the industry moving into dark mode, and that, once again, has been one of the concerns left on the table. But what do you believe could be the best way forward, and how hard will it be to execute what has already been decided?
Look, to execute what has been decided is blunt force, right? I mean, do you have good enough firewalls and blockers and, sites from operating and so forth? It's a technology issue for online gaming. For horse racing and casinos, it's much easier, right? You can go physically inspect and make sure. So, is it implementable? The answer is, at least for horse racing and casinos, it's implementable. For online gaming, it's a technology question. I assume that with the right kind of focus, you can get the right kind of solutions, right? Different countries ban WhatsApp calling. They're able to get away with that, and that's a much more ubiquitous kind of application. The more profound question is this the best outcome for the people and for the industry, meaning for the people, meaning the revenues of the state, the state, all governments together, for the governments and for the industry, and is it protective or somehow value-adding to the people? That, to me, still remains open, right? To my mind, the demise was always the extreme case, right? I don't see things demise just because the tax rate is high. But like you have 100 examples all over the world, right? Like when we tax alcohol high, we expect some of it will be that people stop drinking because that they can't afford to pay the tax. When you tax tobacco high, we expect people stop smoking because they can't afford to pay the tax. So there's enough precedent that you should expect that at least it will have a retardant effect on the rate of growth of the industry because of the tax. And at worst, it could drive a lot of this activity into illegal corners of the market or the world that nobody benefits from. Because then what you worry about is second order effects, right? The loss of revenue, all of this is a primary effect.
Yeah.
The second order effect is once you see criminal activity, meaning by definition illegal activity is criminal activity.
Right.
Then criminal activity with large amounts of money involved will lead to all kinds of other complications and law and order problems and so forth. So that's the real risk of having a high tax rate. Eventually, like all the rest of the world, I think the best case solution will be to find a way to get at a common agreement of what is the platform fee or the access fee or the gross gaming revenue.
And then 28% on that.
Tax that indirectly. Tax that with the equivalent of sales tax. And tax the winnings with income tax as direct tax. That's what most countries in the world do, actually, right? That, I think, would have been the right answer, but it requires a level of technology and it requires a level of implementation that maybe some people feel is not realistic. I can't tell. Were it up to me, based on my global experience, I would say if other people have done it, we should be able to do it. And the industry needs to cooperate. They have to say what is the percentage, and they have to show, like by having separate accounts, that they're actually adhering to that percentage. Because if the percentage is wrong, in 2 years or 5 years or 6 months, you'll find that money is accruing in the pot, in the escrow pot, without being distributed, right? If they do the division wrong, you'll find, if they do the division the other way wrong, you'll find that they're not able to pay winnings, right? So over time, there'll be an accumulation that tells you what's right and what's wrong.
Okay. So you're saying essentially the best way would be for revenue to actually tax 28% at gross gaming, but you're also saying that industry needs to come clean on what constitutes gross gaming revenue and arrive at a uniform definition of what constitutes gross gaming revenue, and that is what, at least as far as online real money games are concerned, the 28% should be levied on gross gaming revenues.
Yeah, I think that would work really well for online, and it would work really well for horse racing.
Okay.
Whether that would work well for casinos or not, I'm not sure, because the member from Goa had all these scenarios where he was talking about people moving tables, winning, losing. I still say that as long as you tax them on the day they come in, and like let's say they come play for 8 hours, 50 games, doesn't matter what they came in with, what they go out with, is what you should really kind of track. And if you start at inception with parallel accounts, you got a solution in my mind, but maybe that's not implementable in the casinos, I don't know.
Well, we will have to wait to see finally what is operationalized by the GST Council when it meets on the 2nd of August. But thank you very much, Mr. Thiaga Rajan, for joining us and for taking us through the deliberations that took place within the GoM. You were part of both the group of ministers meeting. Remember, the last GoM meeting left matters inconclusive and said that it would be up to the GST Council to decide, and the GST Council then, in the words of the Revenue Secretary, merely reiterated an existing decision, which is to tax at 28% on full value. Let's see what comes at the end of the August 2nd meeting of the Council. Always a pleasure. Appreciate your time. We will take a break here on CNBC-TV18, but there's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a minute with more.